Hi everyone, welcome to Animal Matters, our new video series devoted to a discussion of all matters animal rights, animal welfare, the animal movement, animals themselves. I'm Glenn Greenwald.
I'm Grant Lingel.
And we want to begin, Grant, by talking about what it is that essentially we're doing with this,
Yeah.
this new series and what we want to talk about and what we hope to accomplish. And so I thought in order to do that, it would be a good idea to start by talking about ourselves and our own
Sure.
kind of journey. Why are we interested in this
Yeah.
topic and what do we hope to achieve?
So for me, it's something I've been passionate about since I was a child. At 13, I accidentally saw a documentary that traumatized me. So I was in my parents' room by myself watching TV, and I came across a documentary about meat and about the entire process going into the meat industry. And I was 13 and really not ready to see that, as most people aren't ever ready. And I just remember to this day laying in my parents' bed alone, just crying and just watching this and thinking about the deer that I would see in front of my house and thinking about my cats and thinking about this connection that I always felt with animals and seeing what was happening and making the instant connection that the meat that I was eating was one of these beings. And it went through the process that I saw in that documentary. And I just instantly, I was like, no more, I'm done. And it was something that I did. My parents thought it was like a cute little phase that was going to pass. It's never passed. It's only gotten stronger. There was an image of a cat being skinned and thrown into a pot of boiling water. And I had 3 cats growing up, and I was just leveled. Instantly, I was like, well, how is that different than ripping the feathers off of a chicken and throwing a chicken into a pot of boiling water?
Right.
There is no difference other than we've been raised with a certain type of animals as domestic pets.
You can ask people that, why do you love your dog or cat and get angry at people who abuse them and want to see them in prison, while at the same time viewing it as perfectly okay and acceptable to do the same things to pigs or chickens or cow? What is the moral difference? And the only answer you get is, well, that's just how it is. That's tradition and culture. And that was the same argument 200 years ago, where if you said to somebody, why is this white person a free man and this black person property? They would say, because that's how life is. That's the way the world works. There was no effort to make a moral distinction or any kind of...
A big change doesn't happen quickly, and it doesn't happen with just a few people. It happens when people come together to realize that this is wrong.
Yeah.
This is horrifying.
Empathy is really a powerful human emotion and a powerful human drive. If you want to sustain a system of injustice, blocking empathy is a really important way to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously, had people in the time of slavery empathized with black people instead of accepting what they were inculcated with, which was looking at them as property, it would have been almost impossible to sustain the cruelties that system afforded. One of the things that has caused so much change, for example, in attitudes toward LGBT people, and I mean, I've obviously seen it myself in my lifetime, the change has been so radical, and the reason that happened is because empathy was developed for people who previously lacked it, because we were taught to be invisible, and you can't generate empathy for yourself if you're in hiding and you're invisible. For me, the big formative experience, I didn't see a documentary when I was 13, or if I did, I don't remember it, and it didn't affect me. The thing that really, I always loved dogs. I was always around dogs. I actually, we're in this, we should say, animal shelter that my husband and I have built here in Brazil, that primarily is for dogs. There will be for other animals as well. It's run by homeless people. So I always had a dream when I was little that one day I would have a kind of farm like this where there'd be just all kinds of animals. And we're coming close here to fulfilling that. Nonetheless, all throughout that time, when I was thinking that way, loving animals, loving dogs, rescuing them, I was eating steak and chicken and fish and every other kind of animal without giving any kind of a thought to it. And the thing that ultimately changed me was this really banal experience I had, where it was basically animals that convinced me to change how I think through empathy, which was, I was on this really intense speaking tour, domestic. So it was a domestic speaking tour, so there was zero glamour to it. It wasn't Paris and London and Berlin, which would be tiring enough, but at least glamorous. It was like flying on these regional jets in the morning with my husband early in the morning, waking up at 6 in the morning. We would have 2 hours to rest. I would give the speech that night. We would, take a sleeping pill, wake up and do it again for 8 days in a row.
Exhausting.
Incredibly stressful. We were just mad at each other, hating life, hating each other in the way that only married couples can.
Yeah.
And the second to the last place we got to was Amherst, Massachusetts.
All right.
And the professor who had invited me to speak there and had arranged the event said that her neighbor had a farm and they had farm animals, and said, would you guys want to just kind of hang out at the farm? And we said, yes. It was like someone offering a huge bucket of water in the middle of a desert. And we went to this farm, and right at the border of the farm, there was this family of cows, maybe about 15 or 20 of them. And we interacted with them, we petted them, just noticed the gentility of them, the personality differences of them, the complexity of their social interaction. You had the big male cows and the mother cows protecting the babies, and the babies and the adolescents more curious. And instantly our mood changed. And it was so powerful. We didn't do that ourselves. They did that to us. And through doing that, they convinced me of the power of their life and the importance of their being. And that was the moment I said, after we left them, after about an hour, I told my husband, I said, I'm never eating one of them again.
In your example, it didn't happen overnight. You cut out beef, great, and then eventually you cut out other things. Some people do it overnight, very few. Most people start as vegetarians for a long time, like myself. I was a vegetarian for 2 decades before becoming a vegan. And I had all those excuses. Oh, well, the chicken's not dying if I'm eating the eggs. Oh, the cow isn't dying if I'm drinking its milk or eating its cheese. I had these justifications because I didn't want to.
Why isn't that true?
I was ignoring the suffering. I was focusing on the fact that they continue living. They're suffering way more because it's perpetual. Their life is a cycle of cruelty that doesn't end quickly, like, a chicken that's slaughtered for its meat. A chicken, a layer hen that's raised for its eggs. It's over and over and over, just like cows that are forced to produce milk over and over. So many people just think cows are these milk machines, but of course they're not. They produce milk like a human does when they're pregnant. So I think
it's funny. When I wrote that article, the first one that I wrote about animal rights as a journalist, which was the abuse at the Smithfield factory farms, and specifically the abuse to which pigs are subjected, highly intelligent, socially complex animals, and I had no idea that my audience would even be interested in it. It was one of the most read articles I had ever written. To this day, I hear from people saying that article changed my diet. And yet at the time that I was writing that article, I was still eating fish. I'd given up all meat, but I was, and dairy as well. So I was having sushi at night. And I don't look back at that as shame. I look back at that as an important process of incrementally becoming a more ethical person through my choices.
What do you want to get out of this series? Like, what are you looking to do with Animal Matters?
The thing that I think is really interesting is we're now at a crossroads where animal rights and animal welfare and the whole issue surrounding animals, for so many reasons, has an opportunity to drastically expand the number of people who are interested in it, devoted to it, a part of it. And I think this gives a great opportunity to think about how people like us who haven't spent their lives immersed in the movement can start thinking about these issues differently, can start changing their lives to make a difference in it, not to use jargon and dogma, but to use questions of ethics and morality and politics and practicality to how to think differently about these issues and how to attract more people to them instead of repelling people away, and just to kind of build a different vocabulary and framework, not to replace what animal rights activists are doing, but to supplement and support and aid and expand it.
So that concludes the first installment of Animal Matters. And one thing that we really want to encourage is that this is an open discussion. This is something that we want you to be involved with as well. So if there's topics or things that you want to talk about or hear us discuss, please let us know. There's many great issues that can be debated and discussed here. So we'll be back with more episodes of Animal Matters. Thank you so much for watching. Hello and welcome back to another episode of Animal Matters. I'm Grant Lingel.
And I'm Greenwald.
And today we're going to discuss the animal rights movement. What is it? Where did it come from? Where is it going? Because to many it's this very fringe movement, and at least it started that way. A lot of people in the mainstream thought of it as kind of like a radical extremist movement. But that's not how it really is today. It's picking up more traction. It's becoming, it's involving more people. It's getting a bit more credibility in the media, not nearly as much as it deserves. But I'm starting to see movement in the right direction, and I'm starting to see more people taking it seriously, and I'm starting to see things change a little bit for the better. But obviously, we have a long way to go.
When I first started focusing on animal rights in my journalism, some of my readers treated it as this radical leap into this whole new area unrelated to the work I had previously been doing on civil liberties, imperialism, and empire, and abuse of power, and secrecy. And eventually, I was able to make the argument, not actually with much difficulty, that it's a natural extension of all of the work that I had been doing, that all of the principles that I had been working to uphold or expose were the same ones in this area. And the one that was most prominent to me was how war works and war propaganda works, because the United States, for example, is a country that has now been at war for 18 straight years. And if you think about why is it that the population of the United States cares relatively little about that, even in presidential elections, it's almost never discussed. Obviously, part of it is because the sacrifice is borne only by a small number of the people who are in the military and their families. But I think a bigger part of it is that the horrors and evils being done in our name are almost always hidden from us.
Out of sight, out of thought.
Out of sight, out of mind. We never see the mangled bodies of the children that our drones and our bombs kill. We keep the violence and atrocities hidden, and therefore the population just can kind of go about their business and not have to think about it. And I think that's been a major reason why the unspeakable evils of factory farming have largely gone unnoticed and are now finally starting to be awakened, because people are no longer able to turn away because the evidence and the video is out there. And so when you connect, the pigs that you see in wallowing in misery and suffering to the way that you felt such empathy and love for the cute little goat or the cute little pig on the YouTube video that got 10 million views, it's impossible not to make that connection. And that's why the agricultural industry is so obsessed with keeping their evils hidden, because they know once they start to surface, our natural human emotions are going to be triggered. And I do think that's been what's been driving the change in the animal rights movement. Traditionally, animal rights activism has been more or less confined to left-wing precincts. So I guess I'm wondering, in part because I don't know the answer, why has that been? And can that change? Is that changing?
I hope it can change. I don't know why it started with the left and why more people on the right, because there's plenty of people on the right that love animals, that have pets. But there's this strong disconnect that we discussed as well in the first episode between domesticated pets and farm animals. So, I mean, there's something that's, something that doesn't just happen on the right or the left.
There's a breakdown of traditional left-right divisions across the Western world. In France, for example, you see this yellow vest movement. Is it a right or is it a left movement? It's both and it's neither. It's people angry about wealth inequality. It's people angry about depressed wages. It's people angry about neoliberalism and international institutions not caring about the common person. These are left and right grievances, and they're neither. You see it with Brexit, you see it with the election of Trump, you see it with, even interestingly, the Occupy Wall Street movement and the Tea Party movement, protest movements in the US. which are thought about as being ideologically opposite, actually had a huge amount in common when they began. They both began, at least in part, in anger over the bailout, the Wall Street bailout. Why did you bail out Wall Street titans who caused the economic collapse and led us all suffering? So I think there's a breakdown in general where this attempt to pit right against left no longer functions the way it used to, because we're starting to realize that we have a lot more in common and have a lot more common enemies than 15 years ago when we were all focused on the left kill babies and the right hate gays. I think that that tactic is starting to erode. But I think a bigger part of it too is, I think part of the hostility for a long time on the right toward animal rights activism was the fact that hunting culture was an important part of, right-wing areas, rural areas. Also, there was this kind of iconic myth around the beauty of family farms.
Right.
Farmers with beautiful
and that's why the packaging on all foods has
organic. Because it makes people think it's something noble.
Right.
And now that people are starting to see that, in fact, it looks like, mass slaughter, that there's not beautiful mountainsides populated by cows, but horrific conditions where they're clearly being treated not like living beings but objects. The fiction and fairy tale that allowed people to view it in a positive way is starting to be decimated. And in part, I think that's our challenge, right, is to put the reality, not in a didactic or lecturing way, but put the reality of what this is in front of people and let them decide whether they really are still supportive of it once they see it for what it is. And I think that's why that ideology is breaking down.
Yeah, there's so many fantastic documentaries and great books, and it's too many videos on YouTube to count of what happens inside a factory farm, or the horrors in CAFOs and all of these just places that no one wants to see it. But so many people continue eating it. They continue just shutting it out of their minds and, feeding their habits. Is there, I'm trying to figure out what more can be done as animal activists, because the videos exist, the books exist, the articles exist.
We have this instinct to turn away from horrific things, right? We don't want to see dead bodies. We don't want to watch video of maimed and dying people. And so as people who want to get people to change their minds, we need to be aware of the fact that we can't just go around trying to force people to watch things that make them feel horrified and terrible, because that's really dreary, right?
And it can cause the opposite effect. It can push them even further away.
Yeah, for a long time, I think one of the reasons why I didn't become a vegan and I didn't focus on animal rights activism is because it is so depressing and horrible. I wanted to be one of those people who just pretended it didn't exist, because I felt like I couldn't do anything about it. And even to this day, when I do journalism and I talk to animal rights activists and I interview them about some action that they did, when we get to the part where they tell me, oh, we entered the farm and saw, I start bracing myself and wanting to hang up, because I don't want to hear about the animals and the conditions in which they're suffering, because I have that instinct, again, to close my eyes and turn away. So I think what this discussion reveals more than anything else is the principal challenge of finding the right balance between having people see the realities of the agricultural industry and the unspeakable horrors it entails, without driving them away with dreary and difficult material, because at the same time it's necessary to attract people with the beauty and the compassion and the empathy that animals foster, which ultimately is the key, the animating emotion that drives the entire movement. And part of what we're trying to do is to find a way to create a new discourse, so that it's not just hardcore, lifelong animal rights activists who are thinking about these issues, but also people who love animals and who feel empathy and who believe in the principles underlying this movement as well, and think about how to encourage them and create ways for them to contribute also. And that's part of what we're hoping to explore here. And I think this discussion illustrates the challenges, but also the opportunities for this movement. Thanks again for watching, and we will see you the next time.
Hello and welcome to another edition of Animal Matters. I'm Grant Lingel.
And I'm Glenn Greenwald.
So Glenn, animal rights is an important issue to both of us, but why do you think that it's not an important issue to so many people, even people that do care about animals and do love animals? What's stopping so many people from truly caring about animal rights in general?
I think part of it is what we've discussed previously, that the true horrors of the industry have been kept largely hidden by design, and therefore the true atrocities being committed are unknown to many people who would be moved if they knew about them. But I think there's actually something deeper, which is a belief that has been ingrained or inculcated in a lot of people that isn't necessarily a conscious belief, but that is something that they've come to embrace perhaps subliminally, which is the idea that even if you like animals, even if you think dogs are nice, animal life is inherently less valuable than human life. And that in fact, if you look at nature, it seems as though animal life exists primarily, if not exclusively, to be a means to the end of human advancement. That they're here for our food, for us to kill for enjoyment, that historically and traditionally humans have survived by slaughtering animals and then eating them, and that either religion or God or the natural order has decreed that animal life has less value or even no value as compared to human life. And I think a lot of people have internalized that as a philosophical conception. Is animal life the exact moral and ethical equivalent? Does it have the same value as human life? Or do we continue to believe that animal life, even if it has some value, we love our dogs, monkeys are cute, animal life is still inherently less valuable than human life? What is your view on that, and do we need to answer that question?
Well, I think every living being has the right to live and pursue whatever it is that that being is pursuing, whether it's happiness or procreation or just another meal or whatever. I look at a pig the same way I look at a dog, a happy, cuddly, lovely little creature that just wants to be free. And so, me personally, I believe that all life is valuable. I don't see humans as superior. We might be more intelligent. We might be logical thinkers.
It's an argument about intellect, that human beings are self-conscious of our life and our death and therefore our existence.
Mm-hmm.
That what human beings are capable of intellectually is so much higher than what other non-human species are capable of, that in itself demonstrates the inherent superiority of the value of our lives as opposed to other animals. This whole premise, first of all, of whether or not it's even true that humans are more intelligent than non-human species, because of course there are things humans are capable of doing that no other species can. There are things, though, that other species are capable of that humans are incapable of. My dogs can recognize things by their smell that I can't begin to comprehend, or through their hearing, or even more importantly, through their empathetic connection to other beings and to other people. Mm-hmm. So I think the whole premise that human beings are more intelligent than other species is highly dubious, unless you look at a very narrow kind of intelligence. And in general, people tend to value types of intelligence that they possess more than less. But then I think there's another question, which is, even if you assume that humans have superior intellect, why does it mean our lives are more valuable? Yeah. Right? So if there's a race from another planet that ends up visiting Earth that is more intelligent than us, or if artificial intelligence ends up with a higher cognitive ability, which is almost certain to happen in the relatively near future,
then where do we stand?
What's the moral argument for why they can't just eat us or destroy us? What moral or ethical ground do we have for saying that for claiming certain rights not to be abused or exploited or slaughtered or extinguished by these more intelligent species?
Yeah, I mean, this idea, like I mentioned, of speciesism and the human supremacy, I believe it has a lot to do with what we're taught growing up. And, we're taught that this planet is ours and that everything is here for us, for the taking, which is ridiculous.
If you see somebody in the street kicks a dog, it's going to create immense outrage, right? In fact, there was this case in Brazil about a month and a half ago where the security guard outside of a supermarket just violently slaughtered a dog, a stray dog, and I think he ended up getting arrested.
Public outrage.
Public outrage. So why are we so outraged when we see a dog being abused or injured or killed, but we're fine with pigs and chickens and turkeys and goats being bred into existence, or cows, for no reason other than to be abused, tortured, slaughtered?
Yeah.
What is the goal then of the animal rights movement? Is it to contest this fundamental premise, namely this view that, well, what you called speciesism, this view that animal life is less valuable than human life? Should the goal of animal rights movement and activists be to combat that by saying this premise is false and anything that is rested in this, right, immoral? Or should it be this idea that, no, we're not about eliminating the moral worth that species are assigned, we're instead about something much less ambitious, which is we just want to improve animal welfare?
In an ideal world, which this isn't, I would say, the end goal and the fight should be to end animal cruelty altogether and work to abolish animal farming and animal consumption and use by humans. To me, that's the end goal. To many people within the movement, that's the end goal. But I don't see why there can't be two roads running in parallel. But there's going to have to be steps.
Should animal rights activists always begin with the premise that anything short of the end of speciesism continues to be immoral, even if improvements on an incremental basis are possible?
Ending speciesism and establishing that all living beings are equal and deserve the same rights and the ability to live a free life and to love and survive without being bred into existence and tortured and suffering until imminent slaughter. Yeah, that's how it should be. I do think that people do want to end factory farming. I think that's one of the main goals. And I think the new movement with the clean meat idea, which is lab cultured meat, which is identical to meat without the animal farming aspect, will be able to change it and make it so factory farming and animal farming eventually does not need to exist.
We're not just about improving animal welfare. We are about eliminating the view that says it's permissible morally to treat animals as objects, right, to be exploited or have their lives ended for the pleasure and benefit of humans.
Yeah, and it's a question I feel like most people, even people who have been doing this for a long time or people who are very active within the movement, can't answer easily because it is a very difficult question. It's very loaded, and you can see reason on both sides.
I think the same is true of animal rights as a movement and a cause. It isn't just about doing better things for the environment or being more compassionate to animals. I think ultimately asking ourselves these kind of questions: why do we slaughter animals? Why do we view ourselves as morally superior as a race, as a nationality, as a species? Just having these kind of discussions, digging deep into our own moral code, ultimately makes us more empathetic, more compassionate, more thoughtful, and improves humanity as a whole. So I think, as you can see from this discussion and the prior ones, there are all kinds of fascinating ethical, philosophical, moral, political questions that are implicated by our treatment of animal and by the animal rights movement. And a major part of what we hope to do with this series is to speak with you in conjunction with you to explore these issues and to provoke as much thought as possible. And we hope we've done that with this episode and look forward to speaking to you the next time.